When I was a teenager, summers were pretty unbelievable. They were not only hot, but my family didn't have AC either. Summer television was also pretty damn lousy. It wasn't like nowadays when they have summer seasons. Back then, everything was reruns, other than soap operas and Johnny Carson. I wasn't really much of an outdoor kid anyway, so being out of school was a bit of a pain for me. I mostly had to use my summertime to just read. I started reading a lot of stuff like Stephen King, which I tended to read pretty late into the night. It's weird remembering how things used to be back then. I mean, laying on the couch in the living room all by myself, usually with the lights off except for a single lamp behind me, reading a horror novel hours into the night. I would generally be getting a little sweaty too. That's the part that gets me the most nowadays. I didn't even think much about all the sweat back then because I was always sweating in that house. But if I was like that today, it would really disgust me. On the night this happened, it was about midnight or so. I was laying on the couch in the living room, doing some reading. I had seen a few clashes of lightning outside and heard a few cracks of thunder on the way as well. I figured a storm was rolling in, and there might be a drop in the air pressure outside. Might be a good opportunity to open up the windows in the living room for a moment and cool off. It took a while after I opened them, but as the storm got closer, the room did begin to cool off. It felt so good to me. I was also going to have a nice storm to accompany my scary book I was reading. There was a lot of thunder and lightning, without any rain, so it was pretty good ambience without any distraction. At one point, I finally heard a couple of drops of rain pouring down. I thought at that point I should at least shut the windows part way, so the air could still come in but not let all the raindrops in as well. When I looked up at the window, it took my eyes a moment to adjust. When they did, I jumped up and yelled in surprise. I saw that someone was standing at my window, just looking in at me. It was a man, and it didn't seem like he was going to just leave now that I'd noticed him. He reached up and started fiddling with the screen of the window. He quickly removed the screen, and then began trying to crawl in through the window. I screamed for my dad at the top of my lungs. The guy somehow made his way in like a contortionist and came straight at me. He was holding a knife. I had nowhere to go. I felt my back against my chair, and the man was rushing right towards me. He grabbed me with his hand, but I grabbed his wrist as well, preventing me from being stabbed for the moment at least. The man actually seemed surprised I was putting up a struggle. I guess that occupied his mind enough that he was distracted and didn't hear as my dad came out of his bedroom with his gun. He shot the man who was trying to attack me with the knife, and the guy dropped the knife and fell down. He gripped his gaping wound. I grabbed the knife and ran over to my father. My mother was already on the phone calling the police. I was surprised my dad reacted so quickly to what had happened. He explained to me that he had been watching the news, and there had been several homes broken into in town. Several young people had also been attacked recently as well. He already had his gun sitting on his nightstand just in case. Well, when he heard me screaming, he was more than ready to jump out and help. I guess if I had been watching television, it would have been less likely that I'd been laying there with the windows open after midnight. Fortunately though, my dad was ready to protect me. I started walking to the store every day for that day's groceries. It was my way of trying to get a little bit of exercise in. Once it began getting hotter outside though, it pretty quickly became a quite sweaty affair. Once the sun really began pounding down, it got pretty bad. For you to understand what happened in this story, I have to explain to you what my general walk was like. I live in a housing subdivision just outside of town. I walk out of the subdivision onto a minor highway. There's a bridge that covers a forested area in which a sort of train track runs through. Once you get over that bridge, you walk a little bit more, turn right onto the road where all the stores in town are. right off the road along the highway before making it to the businesses. From there, it's a pretty steep hill with a really thick forest. The train runs right through this area. I had been walking for a few weeks down this path when this happened. It was the day after a thunderstorm. It was very muggy and hot out because of this, but I really needed to get to the store. I set out for my walk quickly, and right before I got to the bridge, I noticed something odd. It seemed someone's credit card was just lying on the ground. I really didn't want to touch it because it looked grimy, so I left it there. I took a few more steps though, and that was when I saw what was very obviously someone's driver's license or state ID card. This was also pretty grimy, but I was curious as to what was going on here. I took my foot and turned it over gently. It looked like a teenager. I read the name, but again I did not pick up the card. I kept on walking. When a little bit further down the way, I came upon a folded up personal check lying on the ground as well. This was getting more and more odd. I kept on going on my way. When you walk along a highway, you always see weird things lying on the side of the road. Yes, this was a little more strange than a random sock or a condom wrapper, but I really didn't know what to think about it in the moment. I recalled the credit card I had seen was a PayPal MasterCard or something. I remembered that because I'd never actually known such a thing even existed. The following day, I once again went on the same walk. Needless to say, I was surprised when I now found a second credit card lying on the ground as well. It was just before I got to the bridge. This one was an American Express card. I started thinking that maybe I should pick up these cards and find who they belong to, see about getting them back to them. Truthfully, I didn't want to touch them though. If all the cards belonged to the same person, I could only think that maybe they must have canceled them all or something and were throwing them away randomly. I put it out of my mind and went on my way. I went out the next day, immediately thinking about those credit cards and wondering if I was going to come across another one. It seemed a bit unlikely, but I kept thinking about what was going on here. Lo and behold, I did come across a third credit card, and then even a fourth placed along the path. During the walk, I flipped them over again. This time, I noticed they were all the same name. That name was also the name that was on the state ID card I had found on the first day. I decided to check around to see if that initial card was still lying there. Eventually, I found them all. I put them into a Ziploc bag and decided to stop at the sheriff's office on my way home. I would drop them off there just in case someone had been looking for them. While turning those cards into the police, at a reaction I had not expected. They had a lot of questions for me. They asked me where I'd found them, when I had found them, did I know the guy they belonged to? Where was I the night of the thunderstorm that had hit before this all happened? It was a lot of questions for something I honestly thought would be a simple good deed. They explained to me after I answered that the man who had owned the cards had gone missing the night of the storm. He was a teenager who worked at a local fast food restaurant, and he'd never come home from work. His parents had already reported him missing, having told the police where I found all the cards. They went and checked out the forest around the train tracks. They found the boy's body. He had obviously been taken and thrown down the hill on the side of the road. He had been lying there since the night of the thunderstorm. They think he accepted a ride home from a stranger that night, and that ended up being the worst mistake he ever made. I feel myself occasionally feeling really guilty about what happened, although I couldn't really have helped the guy at all, even if I had reported the car to the police several days earlier. At least the parents could have known what had happened to him in the days before they found his body. The thing I'm not sure about though is how those cards kept appearing every day I went out on my walks. I guess I'll never know. I do a lot of driving, probably more than most people ever have. I don't drive for a living or anything like that. It's just that I live pretty far from my extended family, and I hate flying. I love visiting them though, so I'm always driving back and forth. I can't tell you how many long and empty highways I've driven on at night. Through the desert, through the rain, through the snow and hail. People who drive a lot know two things. Once you drive on one route over and over again, you sort of go into autopilot when you're on it. And two, there are times when you are on long stretches of highway, which you'll not find a single rest area or any place to stop. So, as I mostly drive overnight, I tend to drink a lot of coffee on the way there. This happened about 5 years ago. I was on the way to visit my grandmother, who lived out east. I live all the way in California. I was out driving at night, drinking my coffee as usual, when I realized I had to go to the bathroom really badly. I hadn't seen a single stop in a while though. Not a rest area, not a gas station, not a single thing. It was one of those instances when you really feel like you have to go. I also hadn't seen any cars. After a while, I knew I'd have to just pull over and do it behind a bush or something. I debated it in my head for a few minutes, literally squirming in my chair. I decided to not delay any longer. I pulled my car over and ran off to the side of the road. I took care of my issue quickly, ran back to my car, and jumped into the driver's seat. I soon returned back on my way, and now I felt like $1 million. At that point, I glanced up into my rear-view mirror to check behind me. Only now, there was someone sitting right behind me in my car. The man knew I'd seen him too, because our eyes met in the mirror. He looked like a vagrant, gruff and dirty. His eyes remained locked on mine for a moment. Before I could do anything, the man leaned forward and pressed something up against my neck. I knew it was a knife. I began panicking and wondering how this guy had even gotten into the car. When had he done it? He had to have been there since my last stop when I took my bathroom break. I guess I was just lucky that I had to stop and go to the bathroom exactly where someone had been waiting for a driver to come by. None of that really mattered to me in this moment though. He had his knife up against my neck. I tried to ask him not to hurt me, but he made sure I could not speak a single word to him as he pressed in deep with the knife. I felt tears flowing down my eyes. I was sure this man was about to kill me. Instead, he told me to slowly reach into my pocket and take out my wallet. I did so and slowly handed it to him. He took my cash out of it and my credit cards as well. I guess he was pretty happy about the amount of cards in there. Plus, I had about $500 in cash too. After he removed everything, he threw my wallet into the front passenger seat. He then instructed me there would be a turn coming up on my right and a few miles down the way. I was to take this turn with him. I did so, and drove down the very lonely and dark dirt road, not knowing where this psycho was taking me, or what he would do to me when we arrived. Eventually, I came up to an old beaten-up trailer. It was like something from a horror movie, like Wrong Turn or something. I expected him to get out and kill me. He did tell me to get out, and I did so as well. He followed, and I prepared for the worst. He reached into his car, pulled out the wallet, and threw it at me. Then he got on a motorcycle and told me to wait 1 hour before leaving. He said if I didn't, he would kill me the next time he saw me. Then he drove off. I waited for an hour and drove to the police. I reported the guy and what happened. He hadn't done anything with my credit cards, so I figured he had only taken them to make it harder for me to get the police on his tail. I guess I was pretty lucky that all the guy really took was some money. I mean, he took a piece of me with him when he left, my security, and still freaked me out whenever I got into my car, wondering if someone would be in the back seat again. Whenever I tell this story, I always wonder how long he had been waiting there for someone to come along, and how long he had been waiting in my back seat to do what he did. It sucks when someone basically ruins it for everyone else. I like to believe that people are mostly good. However, there are people out there who try to take advantage of that idea. Those are the worst kinds of people. I work a second shift job at a call center. I like it because I'm a night person anyway, but the greatest thing is that there's no traffic at all going home. I can just shoot home as quick as possible when I'm done with the day. Not having many cars on the road, though, backfired on me once. This night, I was really exhausted. However, because I was on the freeway, I noticed up ahead that someone was pulled over. It appeared that they were working on their car. I'm sure we've all seen it at some point. We all wonder if we should stop and help. If it was busier, I probably wouldn't have bothered. I would have thought another car would do better than me. But there weren't any cars out at this time, so I decided to go and do a good deed. I pulled over in front of the car and got out of my own vehicle. I asked the person, who looked like he was trying to change his tire, if he needed any help. I walked over to his rear passenger side door. He was in the process of jacking the car. He waved me away while he was working, and when I didn't leave immediately, he turned and ran away. I was a bit surprised at first, until I looked into the passenger seat of that vehicle. There, I saw a woman tied up and gagged. I grabbed my phone and called the police immediately. I had turned my back on the man in the moment, though. He struck me from behind, knocking me out immediately. The very next thing I remembered was coming to. Police cars were surrounding the area and had pulled up to the car with the flat tire. The car was still there, but the man and the girl were gone. My car was also gone too. It didn't take long to find out what had happened. It turned out that this had been going on for a while. The girl in the back seat wasn't even a real prisoner. Apparently, she was an accomplice, and it was a scheme to steal my car. The guy was a fugitive and wanted for murder, so he and his girlfriend frequently tried to change their vehicle. Mine wasn't found for days. When it was found abandoned, of course. My registration was missing from the glove box. It had my address on it, so the whole thing made me feel very uneasy. I was never aware if the people got caught in the end. Plus, they knew where I lived now. If the guy was wanted for murder, I was a witness, so I didn't know if they would come back and finish me off or something. They never did that, obviously, but it took a long time for me to feel comfortable again. I remember when Roger Ebert was still alive. He would always mention certain movie cliches that he always noticed. The one that I remember the most was that in horror movies, the protagonist will often stop at a really run-down gas station that looked like it was run by inbred hillbillies. He felt that was very unrealistic. Now, while I think that may be mostly the case, I've seen some pretty awful gas stations in my day. This took place in the 70s. I had rented out a cabin to spend a week's vacation in. Oh, yeah, this was also before all those movies came out with the cabins in the woods and all that. I thought I'd get away and work on some poetry in the comfort of nature. The only problem was, I got lost on a lot of the roads that got you off the main road. They were unnamed mostly, and the one I was looking for I also found out was one of those unnamed roads. So I ended up being lost for a couple of hours down a road that had a sign that pointed me to a gas station. When I pulled up to the station, I was immediately nervous. It was exactly like the sort of thing you would see in a scary movie. It was just a rundown shack really, with one dirty fuel pot. At first, I thought it was abandoned, but then I noticed an old man in a rocking chair on the porch. I figured the man would at least be able to give me some directions, so I parked on the side so as to not block the way. I got up and walked to the porch, asking the old man if he worked there. He gestured for me to walk into the building, and I did so. I was actually shocked that such a place could even exist in real life. The walls were evidently actually rotting. They actually had a small sandwich case as well. I wouldn't have thought anything of it, except that they were giving it to me for free. They also had a cooler with drinks and lots of candy and chips. At the counter was a very creepy-looking individual whose clothes were very dirty and had an ungroomed beard as well. One of his eyes was closed, which I later learned was because he did not have an eye in that slot. I went up and asked him if he knew where the road I was looking for was. He scowled and asked if I was going to buy anything or needed some gas. I told him I'd probably pick up a drink, but more than anything, I needed some directions. I explained where I was going. The man seemed familiar with the area, so he told me how to get there. I thanked him and left, completely forgetting I told him I was going to buy something. I heard him swearing under his breath. I tried to hurry and get away from the place. Maybe it was rude that I didn't buy anything, but I just felt uncomfortable when in there. When I got outside, I noticed two things immediately. First, the old man in the rocking chair was no longer there. Second, he was over at my car door, which was now open. He was rummaging through my things. I figured that was why the cashier was upset I'd left immediately, without buying anything. His friend was apparently trying to rob me. I yelled at the guy and approached him. He heard me coming though. Right when I was about to grab him and pull him away from my car, he reached out and slashed me with a pocket knife. It hit me right on the arm. I yelled and gripped my now bleeding arms. He now had something in his hands from my car. He took it and ran back to the store. I decided I needed to get the hell out of there. I'd have to find a hospital as well. I got in my car and drove off. It only took about 20 minutes though, before I saw a police car behind me. Its lights and sirens went off. I pulled over, and the officer got out of his car and ordered me to get out of mine with my hands up. I didn't know what that was about, but I did what I was told. I yelled at him and said I needed to get to a hospital because someone had attacked me with a knife. The officer arrested me without telling me anything. He took me to jail, and I was in a cell for several hours before anyone told me what was happening. Apparently, right after I left, that gas station worker had called the police and told them I'd robbed them. That's when they confronted me. Apparently, I'd tried to attack them, and the guy had cut me with a knife to defend himself. They claimed I tried to steal a hunting knife from them. I realized then that that's what they'd stolen from my car. That hunting knife helped me a lot actually, because it happened to be an engraved present from my father. When the police confronted the guys with that information, they knew that they had lied. By the time they released me and got me to a hospital though, I had already picked up an infection in the wound. I remember seeing them bringing the guy in with a missing eye on my way out though. He grumbled to me, "My cousins know where you're staying." I cut my losses, went to the hospital, and then drove home. I never even got to see the cabin I'd rented out.